DC's modern age introduced a wave of new heroes, villains, and anti-heroes that looked destined to shape the future of the universe. Some arrived with major crossover events, headline storylines, and enormous promotional campaigns that made them impossible to ignore. But as the years passed, many quietly disappeared from the spotlight. Some were abandoned after creative changes, others overshadowed by bigger names, and a few simply stopped appearing altogether. They weren't forgotten because they lacked potential. They were left behind as DC moved on. But which modern-age characters faded the fastest? Here are 10 modern-age characters DC wants you to forget. At number 10 is Triumph, or William McIntyre. Introduced in Justice League America issue 92 in 1994, Triumph was DC's attempt to inject cynical arrogance into the Silver Age by forcing a massive retcon. He was supposedly the true founding leader of the Justice League, who sacrificed himself to save the timeline, wiping everyone's memory of his existence. DC pushed him heavily in Justice League Task Force as a Superman alternative, but readers immediately rejected this forced intrusion. Fans despised the implication that a new, edgy anti-hero was responsible for the classic JLA legacy. This unearned retcon dragged down sales as the speculator boom finally burst. Realizing the mistake, DC quickly pivoted. Grant Morrison turned Triumph into a failed villain during their legendary JLA run, freezing him into a literal ice statue. To finalize this corporate burial, Prometheus shattered the statue in Cry for Justice, sweeping up the broken pieces. When the New 52 rebooted, Triumph's entire history vanished. At number 9 is Fate, or Jared Stevens. In 1994, DC editorial demanded a gritty, street-level overhaul of their mystical properties, resulting in the debut of Fate Issue 1. Jared Stevens was an edgy mercenary who notoriously ripped up the classic Dr. Fate cloak to make arm bandages and actually melted down the iconic helmet of Nabu to forge an Ankh-shaped throwing knife. Armed with massive guns and sporting tribal facial scars, he received a highly publicized ongoing solo title. This total misunderstanding of the IP alienated the entire magical fanbase by transforming a beloved legacy mantle into a generic trenchcoat-wearing cliché. The book quickly hemorrhaged readers and crashed after just 22 issues, becoming a notorious symbol of terrible 90s aesthetics. When Jeff Johns and James Robinson revitalized the Justice Society in 1999's JSA Issue 1, they unceremoniously had Stevens murdered by Mordru. This abrupt execution functioned purely as ruthless editorial housecleaning to permanently restore the original aesthetic. At number 8 is Pantha, or Rosabelle Mendez. Debuting in New Titans issue 73 in 1991, Pantha was born from a corporate mandate to give the Teen Titans their own Wolverine counterpart. This aggressive, feral combatant possessed razor-sharp claws and a tragic amnesiac origin story reminiscent of Weapon X. Executives prominently featured her to inject a desperate, marketable edge into a team rapidly losing ground to Marvel's blockbuster X-Men titles. However, her forced hostility alienated the audience almost instantly. Lacking the emotional resonance of the earlier Wolfman and Perez era, she quickly morphed into a glaring symbol of the franchise's creative stagnation. Drifting aimlessly through disjointed crossover events, the feline anti-heroine became utterly insufferable to the core readership. Recognizing her toxic status, writer Jeff Johns utilized her as literal cannon fodder during 2005's Infinite Crisis issue 4. To demonstrate Superboy Prime's terrifying power, he notoriously backhanded Pantha, decapitating her instantly in a gruesome, intentional purge of a forgotten 90s artifact. And if you think Pantha was a weird casualty of trend chasing, the next block of characters is even worse. Stick around for a guy who shoots bullets out of garbage, a cosmic reboot gone horribly wrong, a grunge-era disaster, and a literal blob trying to be a Kryptonian. At number 7 is Gunfire, or Andrew Van Horn. Positioned as the definitive poster boy for the 1993 Bloodlines publishing event, Gunfire first appeared in Deathstroke the Terminator Annual Issue 2. His superhuman ability perfectly encapsulated the sheer absurdity of the decade. He could transform any solid object into a functioning firearm just by touching it. Convinced they possessed a surefire hit, executives quickly greenlit a full 13-issue solo series, relying entirely on excessive firepower to drive massive sales. Instead, this bizarre gimmick faced universal mockery from readers. Gunfire ultimately embodied the creative bankruptcy and hollow excess of the speculator boom, with critical reception plummeting alongside abysmal sales figures. He quickly devolved into an industry punchline for reviewers dissecting terrible trends. Consequently, editorial leadership systematically humiliated him. After having both hands brutally severed by Prometheus in Faces of Evil, Prometheus Issue 1, he survived but was permanently sidelined and discarded. At number 6 is Extant, or Hank Hall. To resolve lingering, complex timeline errors during the 1994 zero-hour crossover, executives demanded an imposing temporal antagonist. They awkwardly grafted a bizarre transformation onto Hank Hall, originally the combative half of Hawk and Dove, reinventing him as Extant. Outfitted with cumbersome, highly detailed cosmic armor, he was aggressively marketed as the supreme executioner of the founding Justice Society. Unfortunately, elevating a grounded vigilante into a time-bending deity felt incredibly disjointed. The decision effectively demolished a respected legacy property just to facilitate a confusing narrative. Furthermore, Hal Jordan's parallel descent into villainy as Parallax completely eclipsed him, leaving Hall's reputation utterly shattered among longtime collectors. To clean up the mess, writers abruptly dispatched Extant by teleporting him directly into a tragically crashing commercial airliner. Years later, Blackest Night quietly restored his traditional, street-level persona. Today, management treats his entire stint as a multiversal threat, as strictly taboo, intentionally ignoring that completely disastrous cosmic phase. At number 5 is Anima, or Courtney Mason. Introduced as another heavily promoted Bloodlines breakout in New Titans Annual Issue 9 in 1993, Anima was pitched as the definitive grunge generation teenage protagonist. Linked to a towering, violent energy monster named Animust, she received a significant promotional campaign and a solo title aggressively targeting the MTV demographic. However, her forced alternative rock aesthetics and convoluted mystical lore completely failed to resonate with the wider audience. Once that cultural wave subsided, Courtney Mason felt painfully outdated, transforming into an obvious relic of a bygone marketing strategy that writers found impossible to integrate into standard superhero narratives. Following her swift cancellation, she was relegated to background crowd scenes for over a decade. Management finally decided to clean house in the comic Faces of Evil, Prometheus Issue 1 in 2009, where the titular villain slaughtered her just to establish his own credibility. Since that exact moment, Anima has remained entirely ignored and forgotten. At number 4 is Matrix, or the Protoplasmic Supergirl. After the 1985 Crisis reboot, an unbreakable mandate dictated that Kal-El must remain the sole surviving Kryptonian. Seeking to exploit a lucrative trademark without violating this rule, John Byrne introduced a bizarre substitute in Superman issue 16 in 1988. Dubbed Matrix, this synthetic, shape-shifting protoplasmic blob originated from an alternate pocket dimension. Promoted heavily throughout the subsequent decade, she even anchored an extensive 80-issue solo run. However, lacking relatable humanity, the alien ooze was eventually merged with a dying teenager named Linda Danvers. This convoluted fusion yielded an earthborn angel of fire, who sprouted flaming wings to battle demonic entities. Casual audiences felt hopelessly alienated as a globally recognized mantle devolved into impenetrable supernatural melodrama disconnected from Metropolis. Realizing the immense financial cost of missing a traditional Kara Zor-El, executives finally shattered their own survivor restriction in 2004. The protoplasmic anomaly was instantly discarded, deliberately ignored during multiversal shifts, and permanently blacklisted. We are now entering DC's biggest editorial regrets, and the final 3 are absolute train wrecks. Keep watching to see a hero used as a literal amputee punchline, an Elseworlds mistake that ruined a masterpiece, and a massive Death of Superman bait-and-switch that management prays you've forgotten. At number 3 is Risk, or Cody Driscoll. Arriving in 1996's Teen Titans Volume 2 Issue 1, Cody Driscoll was a core member of Dan Jurgens' radically reimagined, edgy roster. Designed as a hyperactive adrenaline junkie possessing superhuman strength, Risk was positioned by upper management to eclipse classic sidekicks and lead a fresh generation. However, faithful readers swiftly rejected this new lineup, clamoring instead for familiar favorites like Nightwing and Starfire. The character specifically drew ire for embodying an obnoxious, extreme youth culture stereotype, resembling a walking energy drink advertisement rather than a compelling hero. Following the swift cancellation of his title, he was deemed incredibly toxic. The publisher eventually turned him into a cruel, metatextual punching bag. During Infinite Crisis, Superboy Prime viciously amputated his right arm. In a staggering display of dark editorial humor, Prime returned during the Sinestro Corps War crossover to violently tear off his left one, permanently sidelining the discarded double amputee as a sick, grotesque gag. At number 2 is Magog, or Main Continuity Counterpart. Originally conceived as a brilliant meta-commentary on violent 90s anti-heroes for the seminal Elseworlds classic Kingdom Come, in 1996, Magog was bafflingly shoved into mainstream canon. Lance Corporal David Reed debuted during 2007's Justice Society of America, Volume 3, Issue 1, eventually securing a solo ongoing series by 2009. But what functioned perfectly as a futuristic antagonist failed miserably as a regular protagonist. Divorced from his potent original context, he became just another humorless, heavily armed relic, operating within a universe that had long outgrown such hollow trends. Facing abysmal sales, the title was swiftly axed by disappointed executives. Admitting total defeat, writers eliminated him in Justice League. Generation lost issue 13, using a mind-controlled Captain Atom. When the new 52 reboot launched mere months later, this canonical counterpart was entirely scrubbed from existence, ensuring the original masterpiece remained safely isolated from forced continuity integration within the modern era. At number 1 is Bloodwind. Debuting in Justice League America issue 61 right before the legendary Death of Superman arc, Bloodwind was an enigmatic necromancer designed to inject grim magic into the flagship title. The publisher heavily teased his secret identity to generate intense reader speculation. Initially, the shocking reveal that he was secretly John Johns enslaved by a cursed gem proved remarkably successful. However, executives made the disastrous choice to physically separate them, establishing the sorcerer as an independent entity. Stripped of the compelling Martian connection, fans quickly realized the standalone figure possessed absolutely no distinct personality. His wildly convoluted demonic background only served to drag down the ensemble's pacing. As a result, he was discreetly removed from the primary roster and banished to the absolute fringes of obscure publishing history. Current DC leadership purposefully ignores his existence, deliberately keeping the nostalgic memory of that iconic 1992-era roster pristine and completely free from cumbersome mystical baggage. These modern-age characters deserved lasting relevance. Comment your biggest missed opportunity, press the subscribe button now, and turn on notifications for more DC deep dives.